Good morning, Liberty. It is Monday morning, May 6th, 2019. My name is Michael Boldin, broadcasting to you live from my home office and studio for the 10th Amendment Center here in downtown Los Angeles. It's 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, so good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in. I'm very grateful for you spending a little time with me today. I think it's pretty awesome, actually. Pretty cool. I hope you had a really good weekend and your Monday blues aren't too bad and the week is off to a good start. We're broadcasting live through our channels over on Facebook, Periscope, DLive, and YouTube. We also have our archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, where you can get the podcast episodes, all of our show notes, etc., etc. Today, I want to do another episode like I did a couple of weeks ago, Nullification Movement news. Instead of getting into a lot of detail on one specific issue, which is what I generally do on this show, or I tend to learn about a specific issue with you as I go through whatever notes I've put together on a particular topic. Instead, a couple of weeks ago, I did an episode that just kind of covered just rapid fire-ish through a bunch of different reports that we've been covering on a regular basis here at 10thamendmentcenter.com. Just to give you guys an update on various issues on what's going on, because we do two big things here as an organization. One, we focus on educating people on the proper role of government under the Constitution, the fact that there's very limited delegated powers and everything else, as James Madison put it in Federalist 45, are reserved to the states or to the people. That's what the 10th Amendment is all about. That's what Thomas Jefferson called the foundation of the whole system. And Madison said the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those reserved to the states and the people are numerous and indefinite. So we teach people about those basic things. We feel that there is a lot of use to that. But then also, instead of just reading a bunch of books, we're not going to see liberty happen in this country by people reading a bunch of books, whether it's from us, constitutional books, or it's Rothbard, libertarian books, or anything. You're not going to get that done. So we have to couple our education with real, concrete, on-the-ground activism. We follow Thomas Jefferson and James Madison's advice. Madison, his advice in Federalist 46 to use a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. And then Thomas Jefferson to always push the ultimate principles of liberty that we believe in, but then at the same time push as far as events will render prudent. That's how he put it in a letter to James Madison after the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 passed. Anyways, that's kind of a long rambling hello to let you know that I'm going to do another one of these episodes covering the latest in the nullification movement, the latest news, the things going on that I think are important, that I think you might find interesting, and that even if they aren't happening in your state or local community, that you can take the strategies being employed elsewhere on one issue or another and then try to work to get it done in your place. Because going back to Madison's advice in Federalist 46, he gave us 4 steps on how to defeat federal programs, and not one of them included vote the bums out in Washington, D.C., or sue the federal bums in federal courts in the hopes that the federal courts were going to overturn federal power. Those are part of the system, but that's not how you actually defeat federal power. You don't defeat federal power by going to the federal government in the hopes that it will limit itself, because when you do that, you shouldn't be surprised when that federal power continues to grow and grow and grow. So before doing that and getting into all the news of the day, I want to say hello to everyone out in the live chat. I love the live version of the show, even though we do archives and podcasts and all that. But to me, it's a lot of fun. I spend a lot of my day during the day when I'm working, background, YouTube live, just kind of watching. And I think the move away from kind of the moderated, government-controlled in many ways. The old-school TV system was who was authorized to get a license to broadcast. So this style, I think, is really empowering for all of us. So hi out to everyone in the live chat over on YouTube. Tyler, EHP Training, Justin, Larry Clark, Do You Love Me Forever says, yeah, baby. Jeremy Anderson, salute back to you, too. And a few others. Over on Facebook, Daryl, Bill Green, awesome. Bill Green is the guy who gave us the whole concept of undermining the Fed on a step-by-step basis with actions at a state or a local level. So kudos to you, Bill, for all the great work. Mike Meharry did an interesting interview with Bill on that, plus his I don't know, label. He identifies as a faithless elector under the Electoral College, so Bill is a good man. Good to see you here. Dan Reed as well. Joyce Joanne Thompson, Eric Nance, and Tom Rankin. Good to see you. Everybody else, I appreciate you joining me. Even if you're not here live, I know most people actually tune in later on in the archives, but to me, it's a lot of fun. I love being able to interact, engage, sometimes answer some comments, sometimes see some trolls, whatever it may be. So thank you very much for being here. And if you notice, since we're talking about Nullification Movement news, I thought I would proudly wear my Southern Poverty Law Center t-shirt. They have me labeled, and they have for the last 7 years, if you can see it here. For the last 7 years, they've had me labeled on their hate watch columns. Not just in their listing. I know they do a listing and they show this whole long list, but they've done a full profile of me for the last 7 years as a bad guy, a leader of the radical right, which is, I think, very odd if you take into account my anti-war and anti-drug war and anti-police state stances. But whatever they want to do it, I guess I take it as a badge of honor, along with people like Boldin and some old Bush administration people and Rachel Maddow, who say that our work is bad. Because if you don't catch any flack, you know you're not over the target. We continually get it from the mainstream left and right. Anyways, that's a bunch of rambling to get going here. Let's talk about the news of the day. First of all, if you want to keep up with the type of things that we're doing, and we don't post everything on social media, absolutely not even close, you definitely want to subscribe to our newsletter over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/register. I just quickly pulled that up so you can see it. But the first thing I want to talk about is a bill that has been up for consideration that's got a lot of attention, that we've actually worked on to support for a number of years. The lead activist on the ground is Ron Calzone. I consider him a friend. He's a very good person. He runs an organization called Missouri First, MOFirst.org. He's often here in the live chat, so if you've got questions on what's going on in Missouri, hit him up or tag him, whatever. I don't know if I see Ron out there today, but Ron has been leading the effort to nullify, undermine, refuse to participate in the enforcement of federal gun control, make it, instead of a national decision, it's going to be a state-by-state decision in Missouri. Senate Bill 367 and House Bill 1039 are amazingly good bills. They do not stop all gun control. They are powerful foundational steps forward for Missouri to reject all federal gun control, and then establish that the process to deal with gun control is no longer deal with Washington, D.C., but then focus on removing gun control laws that are on the books in Missouri. So this is a very powerful first step. And we've been told that if you're a Republican and you have a Republican-dominated legislature, of course you're going to have a bunch of Second Amendment people. Well, unfortunately, for some reason, the Republican establishment in Missouri doesn't seem to want this bill or its companion in the House to move forward. I just want to give you a quick update on what's going on. Senate Bill 367 from Senator Eric Burleson was introduced, let me look at the date, on February 2nd. So it wasn't actually assigned to a committee. So the way it works is the leader of each chamber has to determine what committee it's going to go to. Then the committee holds a hearing on it. Then the committee holds a follow-up hearing for an executive session and a vote. Then on the Senate side, it goes to the chamber floor. They have a perfection vote, so they debate on it, maybe have amendments, and then they go to a third reading and final vote where there's no amendments, and then it goes to the other chamber, and you do it all over again. That's why you have similar legislation, at least in Missouri, in both chambers at the same time so they can go through the process. The legislative session ends in the next couple of weeks, so any delay in this kind of stuff makes it really, really difficult to get passed. And one of the tactics they always use on the state level, whenever you have good legislation that the grassroots supports and they assume that your Republican Speaker of the House, for example, is going to be on board with or claim to, is literally just slow the process down so they can run out the clock and never actually have to pass it, but still claim, well, I've been doing my job. I'd vote for this. So let's see what's going on. He took 3 weeks to even assign it to a committee. Once it got to a committee, it took another month for that committee, the Republican committee chair, to even hold a hearing on it. Then we were told that he was going to actually have an executive session the following week, but for whatever reason, unbeknownst to anybody, skipped the executive session, held it for another week, and didn't have the vote for the executive session in the committee for another week after. So then it passed out of committee. It did pass out of committee pretty easily, which is good. We knew it was going to do that. We know if it's given a vote on the Senate floor, it's going to pass easily. But what do they do then? Once it passes out of committee, it's up. I'm not sure if it's the Speaker of the House or the floor leader in the Senate, the version of the Speaker of the House, Senate President maybe, or if it's the floor leader in the Senate who chooses which bills get to be voted on. But what happened then, it passed out of committee on April 18th. And then it took another 11 days before the committee even reported it out of committee to the chamber to be considered and voted on. So then that delays it another week and a half. So if you see how this all adds up, where this stuff, if they really were on board with it, they could move it very quickly. It was filed. We know the committee was going to vote on it. That we know the committee was in favor of it. The committee members told us. We knew the numbers. It was very easy to see this was going to pass. But if you just keep holding it week after week after week at each stage and say, well, it was just a week here. But in combination, each step of it, there's some establishment jerk, we'll say, in case it's a family program here, holding it up. So now it's at the stage, and has been for a couple of days, on the formal calendar for perfection. It is up for debate today, May 6th. And if the establishment does not put it off like they have been the last couple of legislative days, it will get a debate and a vote. And even though the opposition is likely to try to append a bunch of stuff to it, I'm assuming it is not going to pass. Though, I mean, the amendments aren't going to pass, and then they'll end up having to have a vote on it. It's just a matter of if the state Senate leadership is willing to bring it to the floor to a vote. It is up to do that today. That is the perfection vote today, scheduled for today, and it has been delayed for the last couple of days. If it gets the perfection vote today, then it goes on to the third reading where they have no more debate. All they do is read it one more time and they have a final vote, and then it goes to the other chamber. So we'll see what happens on Senate Bill 367. Even worse, though, and I may be talking a little bit too long on this, is in the state House, where House Bill 1039 was filed by Representative Jared Taylor. And if you look at the dates here, and I'm pulling this up on the screen, again, the links are in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. It was introduced on February 22nd. It was given its second reading in the state House on the 25th. And as of the 26th, the Speaker of the House could have assigned it to a committee. As of February 25th. It took him all the way till April 23rd, 2 full months. They held onto this bill. We were told that this bill would move quickly if it had co-sponsors. At the time that that bill was introduced, there was no one. It was just the sponsor of the bill, Jared Taylor. So we were told February 25th, well, we're going to give a priority on gun bills to those bills that have co-sponsors, and actually all legislation. So over the next few weeks, it racked up more than 24 co-sponsors, which is pretty significant because I've seen a lot of bills actually in Missouri move forward with 0 or 1 co-sponsors. So that was a piece of garbage lie because it took 2 full months, even though there was co-sponsor after co-sponsor, day in, day out, racking up on this bill, saying, I support this bill as well. They still didn't even assign it to a committee. Then it was finally assigned to a committee on April 23rd. And now the Republican committee chair of the House General Laws Committee, I'm not sure who that guy, I think it's a guy named Plochner. Is it Dean Plochner? Someone would tell me. I'm going to see if I can figure this out here, clicking through here. It's Dean Plochner. He's told his vice chair of the committee, who is Jared Taylor, the sponsor of the bill, look, you've got this other bill that we're considering, and unless you weaken that bill, we're not gonna let this one go up for a hearing until you weaken that bill. So we keep getting blocked at every step of the way by Republicans. This is not Democrats doing this. This is not Mom's Demand whatever. This isn't Bloomberg. This isn't Hillary. This is Republicans actively blocking efforts to make Missouri stop enforcing federal gun control. And if you are like me, you recognize that there is no such thing as a constitutional piece of federal gun control. period. We can also deal with the state stuff too. But one layer is to end the federal gun control enforcement. So then everyone knows that they have to focus on the state and local level to get rid of all those gun control level efforts as well, because this is a violation of your natural right to keep and bear arms. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. I'm not sure what's going to happen on House Bill 1039 at all. They're definitely blocking that. Maybe if we can get it out of the Senate in the next couple of days, then we'll see what happens. Ron Calzone, if you end up tuning in, please send me an email. Let me know what's going on over there on the Senate side. We'll be watching this, Senate Bill 367. And of course, if you sign up for our email list, we will post an update on that very, very soon. So enough of me complaining about Republicans blocking things on the right to keep and bear arms in Missouri. Let's move forward to the next piece, which is... Oh, what am I looking at here? Oh, Texas. We're going to Texas. Texas in 2015 passed a law known as the Right to Try Act. And at the time, there was... Let me back this up. I'm going to read this from the report from Mike Maharrey. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which has been on the books for a long time in Washington, D.C., it prohibits general access to experimental drugs. That is, if you're dying or ill and someone says, we've got something that we think will work, here's the information about it, you make a choice whether you want to do this. For decades, and still today, to this day, the federal government has told you that that's illegal until it goes through a lengthy process, sometimes way after people would ever live, even have a chance to live. Let's say you've got 6 months to live and you've got like a 3-year clinical trial up to before this drug can be tried. And so then you're going to die. The federal government says it's not your choice. It's not your body. It's not your choice. You can't choose to risk death even though you're going to die in 6 months anyway. So it's criminal how bad the FDA is on this. But the short version is they've been blocking this. And starting in around 2013 or so, states like Arizona, Colorado, Louisiana, Texas, and others, it turned out to be 40 of them, started authorizing in a very narrow range people who had a terminal illness. If they were going to die, they could do some level of experimental treatment that the federal government said you weren't authorized to do. Because the expanded access program under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was very limited, a lot of people got turned down. So people in the state just started saying, well, let's just start authorizing it anyways and see what happens. Sure enough, after there were 40 states that had done this, the feds and Donald Trump, the Congress in the last couple of years, passed this and Donald Trump signed it. So that's positive. But then you might think, well, that's the end of the story. You still are very, very much restricted. It's only people who are on their deathbed, and it's only a narrow range of people on their deathbed. Well, what's going to happen? If you take the Thomas Jefferson strategy of pushing as far as events will render prudent, you recognize you may not get your full liberty in one step, but good people will continue pushing for more going forward. So Texas passed this Right to Try Act back in 2015, well before the feds were allowing it. And we know we've covered a Dr. Ibrahim Deplassan who treated 78 patients, even though the feds told him that he couldn't, for a form of cancer that took the life of Steve Jobs. I don't know the status of them, but after about a year or so, almost all of them were still alive, even though the feds said stop treating him. So a new bill in Texas from Representative Tan Parker and Flower Mound. This is House Bill 805. This takes the Right to Try Act in Texas and expands upon it. It takes the next logical step forward and it says, if it were to pass, Texas will authorize people to use experimental treatments, not only if they're just dying, well, we're all dying, right? But also if they have a chronic disease. And this is how Mike puts it. The legislation would enable patients suffering from chronic diseases to access medications and treatments not yet given final approval for use by the FDA. And this is an expansion, or it's based on the Right to Try law that went into effect of June 2015. This actually passed out of committee and is going to be up for a vote by the state house in the next couple of days. And in the bill itself, it says it has been suggested that the process to be granted access to unapproved drugs that are in clinical trial phase is arduous and lengthy and comes at a phase of illness when most terminally and chronically ill patients do not have the time to wait. So the feds are saying, well, now we're going to let a few more people, and then the state pushes further. And this is the founding strategy. Look, when the feds tell you you're not allowed to do something, you work in your own area with individuals, communities, and states to do it anyway. And then if the feds back down a little bit, you expand on that and take the next step until the feds keep backing down. And we see this playing out on this, like we saw and are seeing all over the place with 33 states legalizing marijuana, even though the feds can't do it for various purposes, some medical, some other. So this is very positive. We'll see how it goes on a vote in the state house. It looks like it was sent to the calendar committee on April 30th. So that's just got to be scheduled for a vote on the House floor in the near future. Hopefully in the next couple of days, because that does not go too long over there. So the next bill is very similar. This is also in North Carolina. House Bill 934. There were 14 co-sponsors, some Republican, some Democrat. They're also taking a 2015 Right to Try Act in North Carolina, and it would expand access beyond just experimental treatments to authorizing, it says authorizing investigational stem cell treatment. So it's another step forward for people with a chronic disease in North Carolina. And I believe it actually just passed out of the state house. Yes. So on Thursday of this last week, May the 2nd, it passed by a vote of 114-0. Bipartisan. It makes sense. Someone's dying. Someone has a chronic disease. Why should it be up to government? Why would government even want to? How criminal do you have to be to think that it's okay for government to block you? Now, I don't like the idea of having to ask permission from government either, even at a state or a local level, if we're talking about pure liberty. But the fact of the matter is this is actually rejecting a federal restriction on terminally ill or chronically ill patients, and then saying, well, we're not going to criminalize your activity. It's decriminalizing some personal choice, and that's very positive. So the Right to Try Act, efforts to expand on it, even though the feds have passed their own version of it, are moving forward both in Texas and North Carolina. The next bill I want to cover, and there's a series of states covering on this, is asset forfeiture. If you're like me, you recognize that civil asset forfeiture is basically armed robbery. They're stealing from people. They basically charge someone's property with a crime. They take the position that if they believe that you gained money from potentially being involved in criminal activity, they can just take it, whether it's your car, your house, it's cash, anything. The vast majority of asset forfeiture proceedings are not done against like big drug gangs. I believe in some states it's as low as a couple $100 is the average. And I think in Hawaii it's like $2,000. No, that's in Michigan. I think it's around $2,000 is the average. So they're not going after big guns on this. They're really just going after individuals, people in the general public. And either way, the idea of taking someone's property without even charging them with a crime is criminal in and of itself. So we oppose asset forfeiture at every level. Now, the issue here, and I'll just go through it briefly, is that there are two asset forfeiture programs to be concerned with. One, the state. The state has a civil asset forfeiture program that says cops at any level can take people's stuff without a criminal conviction. And then the person has to prove the other way around that they're innocent in order to get the stuff back. And that almost never happens because they make the process so difficult. So the state needs to require a criminal conviction before they can take their stuff. And I think there are arguments even against that, but that's not for this particular show. Then there's a federal program called Equitable Sharing. And what the feds do, and they've done this aggressively, is that they encourage states to do an end run around their own restrictions on asset forfeiture. We saw that very heavily here in California. So up until a few years ago, California actually had some of the strongest restrictions on asset forfeiture in the country, requiring a criminal conviction. But there was no restriction on participating in the federal program known as Equitable Sharing. So what they would do is if they wanted to take someone's car, they wanted to steal someone's car, and they couldn't under state law, they would just call up the FBI or DHS or Department of Justice, whatever, some federal criminal. They'd call them and say, well, it looks like we got ourselves a federal case here. What do you guys think? And they would, I'm assuming they're never going to say no. But maybe they do. I don't know. But what would happen then is that the feds would adopt the case. It's called adoption. It becomes a federal case, and some either regional or a local or a national liaison with the federal agency would be in charge of running the case, but the local law enforcement would still end up doing all the investigation and enforcement of it. And so what happens is they still take the stuff because they're now acting under a federal joint task force. They're acting as federal agents. They take the stuff. The feds do the forfeiture, where they have a very low bar for doing forfeiture. They don't need a criminal conviction in Washington, D.C. They just steal stuff. We know that from the IRS, right? And then the local government gets 80% of the proceeds of the forfeiture for acting as federal agents, stealing the stuff for the feds. And the feds get a 20% profit doing almost nothing. So it's a very, very nasty process. And in order to stop asset forfeiture, you really need to stop both. Because if you only stop it on the state level, as we saw here in California, there was a huge amount of federal equitable sharing happen here in California. They actually ended up closing that loophole on about 85 to 90% of the cases a few years ago, and a number of other states are following up on that. The first was probably New Mexico, Nebraska. There's also been efforts like this in Colorado, Ohio, and a few others to address both the state and federal programs. Well, in Hawaii, House Bill 748 has now passed the entire legislature and has been sent to the governor's desk. It passed 25-0 in the Senate and unanimous in the House. It looks like it was just a unanimous passage. Maybe the House originally passed it with some dissenting, but this would require a criminal conviction in most cases on a state level, but it doesn't address the federal level. So people in Hawaii who want to end civil asset forfeiture, first of all, you need the governor to sign this. They've got a couple of months. I think it's like 45 days, not counting weekends, to sign this. It's been sent to the governor's desk, House Bill 748. And then from there, to follow up, you have to close that equitable sharing program, just a free-for-all with the federal government. So this is very positive. It is not going to get the job done on its own, but it is a foundational step forward to require a criminal conviction. A similar bill in North Dakota, House Bill 1286, also went to the governor's desk on the 26th of April. This the other way around. They actually started this bill when it was first filed. It was probably the strongest asset forfeiture bill that I had ever seen introduced on a state level. And maybe this is what happens when you start it's like the Trump negotiating strategy. You go for as much as you can get, or you go over the top where you know they're absolutely going to reject it. But then what you end up with is still something good. So they would have ended 100% participation in the federal equitable sharing program and required a criminal conviction on a state level. Basically, they would have ended both of it, both federal and state at the same time. Instead, the police lobby organizations were very much against that with the federal programs. They wanted to continue their joint task forces with the feds who hand out hundreds of millions of dollars through this equitable sharing program. I mean, they didn't say that in testimony, but we know. I mean, it's pretty obvious. They love the cash, and if they have to cut back, then they can't afford the things that they do, that they shouldn't be doing in the first place in most instances. But anyway, so 1286 in North Dakota would require a criminal conviction for forfeiture on the state level. And should it be signed, that's a very positive, but there does need to be follow-up to close that loophole on equitable sharing on the federal level. Same thing in Michigan. So we're seeing some positive steps. Hawaii, North Dakota, Michigan. There was a package of 3 bills that were sent to the governor just in the last few days, I believe. Maybe just at the end of April, it looks like. House Bill 4001, House Bill 4002, and Senate Bill 2. They would require a criminal conviction up to $50,000. Now, I don't understand why. Again, I mean, I do understand why. But I understand that the cops want to keep taking people's stuff. So they say if it's large money, we don't need a criminal conviction. It doesn't make sense to me philosophically, because if you believe that you need a criminal conviction, it shouldn't matter the amount, whether it's 1 penny, $1, or $1 trillion. They shouldn't be able to just take people's stuff. But I would still call this a positive step forward, because the Mackinac Center for Public Policy says the typical forfeiture in Michigan is just a few $100s, or a car valued at less than $2,000. So this is going to cover a vast majority of forfeiture situations in Michigan should it be signed into law. That is also on the governor's desk. 3 states covering that. Another bill in Missouri that I want to cover is, I think, a very important one, especially considering the fact that it doesn't matter which political party is in power, mass surveillance keeps continuing. It was such a big deal that the Bush administration was pushing the Patriot Act. Obama came in partly on opposition to this. Then, of course, we had the Snowden revelations. Of course, they were going to reform it. They didn't. Then the Trump administration comes in. A lot of people think that we're going to have constitutional government. We do not. They extended the Patriot Act for another 6 years. The NSA is actually saying that they're not even using the phone records. They're definitely using a lot of other things. And I have a whole episode on that. They're saying, let's end the phone record program. They're not really using it. They don't need that program. In the Trump administration, at least we just saw a report recently, they're actually calling to extend it. Anyways, the short version, they just keep using more and more surveillance and expanding surveillance powers. So House Bill 296 from Representative Ron Hicks would ban the use of resources, material support, or resources for warrantless federal surveillance programs. That's basically all of them. If you were to implement this in Utah, that would require them to shut off water to the Utah data center. If you implement it in Texas, they would have to shut off electricity to the San Antonio data center down there in Texas. But there are positive reasons to do this. And again, the link covers, if you go to the show notes, you can read about the bill in more detail. But this bill passed out of committee quite a long time ago. And I think it's important to it's a mess. Their website is really archaic. For those of you looking, it is just smashed in. I apologize for this. The short version is the bill was introduced in January. It got voted out of committee 2 months later in March. Now, the House adds another layer in Missouri beyond what the Senate does. When it passes out of committee, then it has to go to a procedural committee, basically a rules committee, to say that, okay, well, you passed it out of committee. Let's just make sure it's okay. It's another excuse to slow things down. And since March 2nd, it was actually sent March 14th. It was sent to Rules Administrative Oversight Committee, and it's been sitting there for almost 2 months. Thankfully, today, they finally are giving it a hearing, which means it can go to the House floor. And what they do, and again, why they do this is a tactic that they use. They can say that they weren't opposing things, and the record shows that they're giving it a vote. But the longer they wait, the more likely it becomes that the clock is going to run out, and they're not going to be able to have time to debate any technical amendments. What we saw on the Second Amendment Preservation Act back in 2013 or 2014 in Missouri was they did this same thing. They waited to the last minute, and at the last minute, one chamber or some establishment Republican introduces a very small technical amendment that doesn't change the effect of the bill. And because you have a technical amendment, even though both chambers pass the bill, it has to go back to the other chamber for more debate and vote. And then when you're in the last couple of days of the session, they just skip over it, and then it doesn't go to the governor's desk. So we see the same thing happening on the Fourth Amendment Protection Act in Missouri as we do on the Second Amendment protection. But we'll see what happens. And that's up for a procedural vote today in Missouri. It might actually be happening now at 12:30 Pacific Central Time, so in about a half hour from right now. So the last thing I want to cover here is in New York. There's a bill in New York that would end Common Core. When Obama was in office, we saw these bills introduced everywhere. Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, very few of them did anything beyond replacing the Common Core standards with something else. They're basically opting out and then creating something else. But once Trump got in office, suddenly we didn't see much legislation introduced to end Common Core, as if it's gone. It is not. It's still around, and it's still bad. But very few people are opposing it. They're basically doing the same type of thing that the anti-war movement did when Bush was in office. They were all over the streets, all over the place, hating war. And then as soon as Obama came in, there were no more protests. It was just done. Now we start to see some of it coming back in regards to Venezuela and Iran from the left. Will it stick around if Joe Biden is president? I'm assuming not. So I am very happy to see in all places, New York State Assembly Bill 6372, that would just end implementation of Common Core, and it does not stipulate, and that's what Mike puts in his report here, Mike Meharry, the bill does not mandate any replacement standards. So they're not going to do a repeal and replace. Repeal and repeal is really how you deal with things, whether it's Common Core or Obamacare. Now, looking over to the live chat, lots of good back and forth here. Jane Jane Stetz Peterson, good to see you. Always see you around here on Facebook. I appreciate it. Keep your guns or buy guns. Constitutional carry. Also says constitutional federal government in a pig's eye. No water for you, says Justin Bayola. Absolutely, because if they don't have the resources to run these surveillance programs, they can't keep their supercomputers cooled and they have to shut down. They're storing a ton of data. Dan Reed says, you really have no way to know this, but I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Mackinac. Oh, I should know this. I grew up, I said the Mackinac Public Policy Center in Michigan regarding the forfeiture. I should know this, being a former Wisconsin resident. Neil Archer said Obama's DOJ started ammo limitations on the M855, but there was a lot of opposition to this. And it actually, maybe it was something else as well, but that's basically what they tried to do, but there was a lot of opposition. We don't see the same level of opposition here against the bump stock ban. There is some opposition from good places like Gun Owners of America, from the efforts in Missouri, also House Bill 238 in Texas to ban the state from enforcing things like that. But I'm not sure if the establishment Republicans in Texas are on board with protecting the Second Amendment in Texas. They think the status quo is fine. Good to see Ron Calzone. He says, yes, that's exactly what happened in Missouri in 2014. They run the clock out, and they do this in every state. This is not just Missouri. I think Jane was actually saying this as well. But this is a process they do. If you're on the left and you have a Democrat-controlled place that you're expecting is going to be good, or at least that's what the narrative, they're going to be better on dealing with the drug war, legalization. They do the same process there. They hold the bill as long as possible. They introduce tiny amendments that don't change anything. At the very last second, they say, oh, we tried. We'll come back next session. And they do this year after year after year. And you have to be persistent. People in Illinois on medical marijuana had to push for 10 years with almost the same legislation before they got it passed. So it does take a lot of work because the people you think are supposed to be on your side really aren't. And thank you, Ron, for pointing out that is how it played out. I'm glad I did a pretty decent job of explaining that, but that's what they do. They run the clock to the very end, and you have to keep an eye on this. Now, that's not saying, and it's important to point out the problems that we're facing. And of course, the greatest problem that we're facing, I think, is centralized power. The problem that we face, whatever the issue, is centralized power, because when you have a one-size-fits-all solution on anything, you're almost always violating the Constitution. And if you're violating the Constitution, you're encouraging the next administration to do the same on another issue. So whether you think it's good or bad, you do not want Washington, D.C. to be the solution to any problem, because Washington, D.C. is in and of itself the problem on basically everything. So I don't know where I'm going with that. I appreciate Justin Bayola saying, and the Department of Education. Jane Peterson says, Oklahoma banned it. I've seen some positive and negative, and if you have any links on that, Jane, please post it in there. I've seen some activists on the good side of this, wanting to get rid of Common Core, complaining about what they did in Oklahoma, because they said they were opting out of Common Core, I think in 2015 or 2016, somewhere around there. And then what they're implementing afterwards has been basically Common Core, but not in name. So I'm not sure about that. I haven't looked at it all really closely, but if you've got some information on that, I'd appreciate it. I guess that's really it. I hope you guys found this interesting. I appreciate everybody who sent me feedback after I did my April episode on Nullification Movement News. If you like hearing this kind of quick update without a lot of detail on things, some of the things that we're facing, some of the opposition, if you like this, send me an email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Let me know if you like it, or if you hate it, or if you want to see a different topic cover, whatever it may be, or post an update, your thoughts in the comments, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or later on BitChute or DLive or wherever. And I appreciate all that, all the reviews on iTunes, etc. I'm very grateful for all that. If you want to support what we do, keep in mind all the platforms that we're on are very easily triggered. Their algorithms are very easily triggered. You just have to take 3 very easy steps. Smash the like button, leave a comment, whether it's live or in the archive, and then, of course, share the link with as many people as possible. When you do that, it tells the algorithm of that platform, Facebook more than anything, I think, that they should show the video to more people or the audio to more people. So thank you very much for spending some of your Monday with me today, or whatever day you happen to be tuning in. I'm very grateful. It's awesome. I think it's really awesome that you spend some time with me. I will be back on Wednesday and Friday, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, and I'll see you soon. Have a great day.